Hi, welcome, and thanks for joining us for our session focused on integrating academic, social, emotional, and behavioral supports. My name is Brandi Simonson, and I am joining you from the University of Connecticut. And I am here with my colleagues and friends, Mike Coyne, also from UConn, and Steve Goodman, who is representing Michigan. And we are going to be sharing with you some of our kind of rationale, our excitement, and the work that's ongoing around integrated multi-tiered systems of supports, or more simply, just integrated support. We want to thank and acknowledge the Office of Special Education Programs for having us here virtually and acknowledge their disclaimer. Of course, we represent our own views and not theirs. And we are going to spend roughly the next half hour talking a little bit about kind of why we think about integrated supports. Mike's going to share with you some of the ongoing work of the Integrated MTSS Research Network. And then Steve is going to come in at the end with a lot of the great information around how we actually make this happen. So with that, I'm going to get us started with a quick definition of integrated supports and then talk about why. So the Integrated Multi-Tiered Systems of Support Research Network, the I-MTSS Research Network, has offered a definition of integrated support. And what I love about this definition is that it focuses, of course, on an integrated continuum of practices, but then it reminds us that beyond the practices, we have to think about ways to integrate the data, ways to think about integrating teaming and coaching structures, and along with that, the professional development. And beyond those pieces, think about integrating systems that allow us to support sustained and scaled implementation. So if you look at those components, what we're really saying is this doesn't fall on the shoulders of educators. We need to be thinking about integration at the systems level so we can set educators and students up for success. And so while I pulled us beyond practices, and you can get the full details of that definition at mtss.org, I'm going to have us dive briefly into practices to talk about what it looks like and what we mean when we're talking about integration. So for many of you who have been in the field for a while, when we talk about MTSS or integration, you likely have an image of a triangle in your head. And potentially you have an image that has half of it kind of colored for academic support, half of it for behavior support. And if you're really advanced, you might even have an integrated the triangle that doesn't have a dividing line, but asks you to think about those integrated supports within that framework. One of the things that we've spent time thinking about, though, is this may be a slightly oversimplified version of what integration looks like when we're pulling in academic and social emotional behavioral supports. So we wanted to offer a slightly different way to think about this and turn it into a grid. So think for a moment about students who are going to benefit and be successful with only Tier 1 support. So thinking about students who will benefit from integrated Tier 1 academic and behavioral support. You may then have students that you identify who benefit from Tier 1 academic support, but may need a slightly more targeted approach for behavior, so Tier 2, or more intensive approach for behavior, Tier 3, integrated within their Tier 1 academic support. In contrast, and I have a little spinning circle again on this slide. In contrast, you might identify students who have their needs met with universal behavior support, so Tier 1 behavior, but have more intensive needs or targeted needs for academic support. So thinking about, again, integrating targeted or Tier 2 academic supports into behavior, Tier 1 behavior, and thinking about integrating intensive or Tier 3 behaviors, academic supports within behavior. And finally, and hopefully the animations are going to kind of catch up with my words, sorry about that. Finally, we may identify students who need more targeted or Tier 2 supports in both. So we're really thinking about integrating Tier 2 academics and Tier 2 behavior. And for other students, and I'm going to now go back because all the clicks caught up with me. For other students, we might identify kids who have more intensive or complex academic and behavioral needs. And so we're really thinking about creating that super intensive integrated plan. So hopefully my words match the picture that is there now, because I was flying without the visuals for a second. So I'm going to now kind of land us in why it's important for us to think that way. So why do we integrate? The first key reason with the cute graphic is kids don't show up with only one type of need, right? So whether we're thinking about kids who are supported in Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3, they're going to come with some unique and interesting academic and behavior needs. And for many of our students, those needs are highly interrelated, especially those of you who work with older students. We tend to see that, especially at high school, kids who present with behavioral challenges almost always have accompanying academic challenges. So we need to think about these in a way that's connected, integrated, and allows us to be efficient and effective. So if we think strategically about ways to implement interventions that are integrated and both improve academic and social emotional behavioral SEB skills, we can do that by integrating academic instructional practices with effective behavior or social emotional behavioral support. And so building those links together becomes really efficient and effective for students. So Steve and others led a guide that we have on the PBIS.org website that talks specifically about that interrelationship and actually makes a case that a lot of the academic skills and routines become protective factors for kids' social, emotional, and behavioral needs. So we see those, again, very interrelated. The other quick teaser, and Steve gets credit for this slide as well, is that we have some data historically that have shown us that there's promise in this approach. So we have at this point a couple decades of data that talk about the impact of schools implementing evidence-based practices within a positive behavioral interventions and supports, or PBIS framework. When they implement those practices with fidelity, we see that their social, emotional, and behavioral outcomes improve. On the academic side, it's interesting because those findings are a little bit mixed. So in some studies, we see that academics improve just from implementing PBIS. In other studies, the results are slightly less clear. On the academic side, when schools have implemented response to intervention, the predecessor of I-MTSS, when they have implemented those frameworks with fidelity, we sometimes see pretty meaningful academic outcomes, and especially in the area of early reading. We know a little bit less about social, emotional, and behavioral outcomes connected to implementation of RTI. So we get excited about the possibility of what it means to integrate supports within a multi-tiered system of support framework and implement those supports with fidelity. We see from emerging research and ongoing research, which Mike is about to talk about, we see promise in that research, but we see also a need for additional research. So with that teaser, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, who's going to talk about the Integrated MTSS Research Network.
Thanks so much, Brandi. And I'm going to take a few minutes and give a brief overview of the Integrated MTSS Research Network, which is funded by the National Center for Special Education Research and the Institute of Education Sciences. And in some ways, I think the most important aspect of the research network is that it exists. IS has identified integrated MTSS as a top priority for all the reasons that Brandi talked about. And I think this sends a really important message to the field that reinforces the importance and the timeliness and the promise of I-MTSS, or integrated MTSS. So in a sense, what we were talking about before, that this sort of, we're beyond the proof of concept stage here, and that we understand the promise of integrated MTSS. And so one of the next steps is for the field to work to increase the rigor of the evidence-based supporting the different practices, systems, and supports in I-MTSS. And because this is a OSEP presentation, I want to make sure to acknowledge the really early important seminal work on integrated MTSS that was funded by OSEP. And this includes a number of projects that have provided much of the foundational knowledge about integrating academic and behavior supports together, including some really important work that was led by Steve in Michigan for many years. To give you a little bit of an overview of the research network, the network includes 4 research teams and then coordinated by a network lead. So I want to tell you just a little bit about some of the projects that are going on in the research network. And the first project, which is led by Nathan Clemens and his colleagues at the University of Texas, Austin, focuses on the cohesive integration of support for academic engagement as a keystone behavior within a system of intervention intensification for students particularly struggling in reading or math in 2nd and 3rd grades. They're using a SMART design to evaluate whether self-regulation strategies embedded within reading and math interventions have positive effects on academic and behavior skills. In Project Enhance, which is led by Kathleen Lane at the University of Kansas, researchers are partnering with districts to identify, develop, and evaluate professional learning structures for bringing to scale a coherent integrated MTSS framework to meet students' academic, behavioral, and social well-being needs. The third project, which is led by Alison Gandhi at AIR, is developing a validated school-wide rubric for schools to use as a self-assessment and for researchers to use in studies about integrated MTSS. The project is working to identify essential components of an integrated MTSS framework, as well as to understand the analytic evidence to support the validity and the reliability of the rubric. And the goal of the final project, which me and Brandi are leading at the University of Connecticut, is to try to rigorously evaluate the impact of integrated behavior and reading practices in kindergarten through second grade within a comprehensive multi-tiered system support framework. And we're working on trying to examine the impacts of integrating reading and behavior support at tiers 1, 2, and 3 on students' reading and behavior outcomes, as well as teacher practices. So one of the really cool things about research on integrated MTSS is that it really is not just about one thing. There are so many different components of MTSS, which Brandi really nicely outlined early on. So the network can't cover everything, but the field as a whole is really working to evaluate integrated MTSS and thinking about assessments, screening, and progress monitoring, looking at effective practices in tier 1, and intervention, tier 2, and tier 3. Also looking at kind of systems of support and professional development and training, and all of those can be evaluated and researched using very different and interesting research designs. So one of the things that we're learning from the research network is that there's no one kind of research on integrated MTSS, but there's a whole range of different kinds of interesting research design and components to be thinking about. As part of the research network, there's also coordination that's happening by the network lead, and that really is focusing on kind of dissemination and communication of the network's findings and the kind of work that they're doing, including things about thinking about a comprehensive framework for thinking about I-MTSS, providing dissemination to the field through presenting at conferences. There's going to be a MTSS integrated conference coming up in a couple of years, in different types of dissemination efforts like policy briefs and practitioner articles. Two really cool parts of the research network is the methodological core, and then also mentoring the next generation of MTSS scholars. The methodological core, the goal of this group is to formulate important network-wide, questions about integrating MTSS that can't be addressed by individual research teams, really thinking about innovative approaches for synthesizing and integrating data across teams, thinking about how we can pose really interesting and novel research questions, thinking about combining data from across different sites, and thinking about different kind of research methods and analytic approaches for researching integrated MTSS. And finally, we're committed to open science practices, things like pre-registration and replication and open data and open access to the kind of research that we're doing on I-MTSS. Another goal is to work with younger early career scholars in the field to help mentor and develop a new generation of researchers that have expertise in content and methods to design, conduct, and communicate ongoing research on integrated MTSS. And finally, the overall goal is to really be able to present to the field some of the findings from some of this exciting work to a wide variety of audiences. Also thinking about how we can take what we've learned from across these projects to improve MTSS implementation. But of course, the overall goal is to think about how we can improve student outcomes. Finally, just want to give information about the website, mtss.org. We have information about the different projects there, and we're hoping to be adding new and exciting new information and content on the website over this summer. So thanks very much. And next up will be Steve.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Brandi. For this section, we want to talk about how we integrate supports. So we can really see multiple ways that opportunities for integration. We can do integration through instruction, through the content domains. We can integrate through addressing individual need by integrate through our use of data. And we can also integrate by focusing on systems to support educators. So with this first approach for integrating around instruction, we know that there are very much similarities in good teaching for academic and good teaching for behavior, social emotional behavior. One way we can look at integration is directly connect behavior expectations to academic expectations. For example, being responsible means engaging in class instruction. We can also directly teach academic facilitative behaviors like attending engagement responses. We can prompt what the student should be doing, academic engagement, rather than what not do, such as problem behavior. We can teach students to use skills learned in, for example, reading problem solving and apply to social problems. And we can monitor and student performance in these settings for review for both behavior and academic variables. Now, another opportunity for integration focuses on the content. And a way to do this would be to include social emotional content in literacy and social studies or history lessons, for example. So we may select materials or content that includes social or emotional lessons. And we may use comprehension or discussion questions that focus on social emotional behavior when reading. For example, how do you think that made her feel, to teach more empathy? How do you think this is what's going to happen next, to teach cause and effect? Another opportunity for integration is around addressing the individual needs of students who have more intensive and persistent issues that they're dealing with. And for that, we really look at three main areas. The first is gathering information. So we need to gather information on strengths and needs around the academic, the cognitive, social, emotional, behavioral, health and wellness, and also consider culture and context, the student's learning history, the values and norms of the home and school context. We take that information and we connect it to an intervention. And we focus on intervention dimensions of matching to the strengths and needs of the student. We need to adapt or select an intervention that has a cultural and contextual fit, and it also is appropriate for the intensity or the tier of support. Now, through all that, and once we have gathered information, selected and created an intervention, we want to implement the intervention, and the implementation should consider components of setting up the environment for success, rearranging physical environment, for example. It should also include skill development in areas that the student needs to have targeted skills to further their success. And we want to make sure that there's a functional behavior support that looks at a replacement behavior that would serve the same function as a problem behavior. Another opportunity for integration is around data and evaluation. And within that, what we do know is educators often cite difficulties using student data as a main barrier to implementation. So to help educators use the data in an integrated approach, we need to emphasize that there's an efficiency in using the same ideas and principles behind data collection for decision-making in both academics and behavior. But there's also an effectiveness in utilizing both the academic and behavior data to better decisions in each domain, but also for the connection across the interrelationship between both the academic and behavior and social emotional behavior. Finally, we look at opportunities for integration around systems to support educators. Now, within that, we know that there are opportunities when effective teaming takes place. So teaming would be a system of support. With the teaming, we know that there's could be more efficient scheduling instead of going to multiple meetings, looking at different data sets. You can have one meeting. During that meeting, the team could really look at the interaction between academic and behavior. And there's also opportunity for improved coordination across each of the content domain areas, academic, social, emotional, behavior. But there's also some obstacles that teaming should help to need to address. One is educators may not know how to integrate the academic and social emotional behavior. So it could involve training, coaching, technical assistance, problem solving. Educators may be too early in implementation efforts. So it may be that they have to first establish what's going on in tier 1 to really help out, set the stage for proper implementation efforts. And it may be that there's not enough time to address both content areas in the same meeting. There's just so much work to be done that it may require several times to meet in separate areas of academic and behavior. So there's different possibilities for the integration. What you heard was some of the research of why it's important. You heard Mike provide some of the ongoing work that's taken place in this area. And we just provide a couple examples here of integration opportunities. We thank you for your time, and here is our email address. So if you would like to contact us, please feel free to do that, and thank you.